So I think the long process, you learn to love yourself enough to not tolerate it anymore. And then to love yourself enough to go, I'm not going to jump back into that mistake again. So the one thing I think was branded with going into being single, I looked at it, I'm like, I'm not repeating that mistake. I am not. So it made me look I'm sure probably pretty cold a few times, but needed to know I was never going to go and repeat that. And when you see people do that and they go and they get out of what is bad, we've watched this happen a few times. And, now you kind of learn to have the vision for it. And you're like, no, that's the same thing you left. Don't do that. No. And
welcome back to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. Today, you're going to hear my conversation with Benjamin Tomes, part 2. I'm your host today, Carrie Purcell, founder and CEO of AudioLife. And Ben and I had a chance to start our conversation in part 1, which if you haven't heard, you might want to pause and go back. In that episode, you're going to hear about Ben's early life, what his childhood looked like, how he struggled with and also succeeded with ADHD, challenges with religion, with his parents, starting his coaching career, getting awards for his coaching career, and so much more. I hope you enjoy that episode. And if you already heard it, welcome back to part 2. I won't tell you too much. We're going to talk about all kinds of things ahead. I'm going to ask you a kind of a really broad question. And truth is, in the real meaningful way of why we care, why we do the things we do, you've already answered this. But I'm going to ask you about highlights and challenges in your career. And you've just done that on a micro scale that's so meaningful and so powerful. And, the example of literally getting in, stopping a student from shooting another student. I mean, it's so important and meaningful and powerful. But you've had these, what people would write about. You've had these highlights in your career that are really notable, that are things that other people haven't been able to accomplish. I think we've gotten some insight into why you were able to think differently, be strategic, learn from everything that you'd experienced. But take us through some of the highlights, some of those big successes.
Well, one of the early big ones, starting a wrestling program from scratch is hard no matter where you do it. And unless you build a youth program, you're not expected to ever be competitive. So I started in 1999, 2000, I started Custer's wrestling team. And in the 4th season, we made it to the state team tournament, which no Northside Milwaukee team had ever even come close to doing. And we're notoriously bad teams. So we took out a team who had been there 5 seasons in a row. And that was an amazing highlight. It also led to some lowlights and some challenges because we really sparked a lot of racism when we did that. And so as much as it was a highlight, and I can go back now and get chills watching when we win, I can also go and remember very quickly having to have armed security with us the following Saturday because of the threats made against us online. So there's a yin and a yang sometimes, but we had been I think that didn't get it kind of started to improve a little bit after that. We really had a big impact on changing people's perceptions of the inner city of Milwaukee and the kids that come out of there. There was a documentary made about us in 2003 following our whole season, and it was pretty glossy. I wished it would have had a bit more realism to it because they kind of, I don't think whitewash is the right word, but they definitely sanitized it and took out some of the things that I wish would have been there. But that was a really neat experience to go and be a part of that. It was won a pretty big award in Wisconsin internally from PBS for the top documentary that they did that year. And so that was really neat to be a part of. I was the National High School Coach of the Year by Wrestling USA magazine in 2002. And that was before we made it really big. We were just on the verge of exploding. But, we placed 11 kids on a national team. I had to fundraise like mad to go because our kids came from nothing. The level of poverty, it's incomprehensible. And it's been cycled through for a long time. And so we had to really do a lot of grant writing and things. So I wrote a $30,000 grant and then it got replicated. So for a while it was like Brewster's Millions because we actually had 60 grand in an account that we could use to do some things that otherwise we're never going to have an opportunity to do. And so those things were really, really neat. I moved to Florida. A career challenge was dealing with the administration in Milwaukee Public Schools, who had every intention of closing Custer, which they ultimately did. And being blunt, my wrestling program was in the way. And a really good principal named Willie Jude, he was Milwaukee's Joe Clark, just an amazing man, had asked me how when he got hired, we were the only real successful thing going on there that achieved anything outside of city success.
Yeah.
And he wanted to know what I did differently and how they could carry it forward in the school. And we had a long talk. He interviewed the basketball coach also, who was 1 year, he was 2 years behind what I had done, but he was on the verge of getting them. You could tell they were going to be a lot better. Wanted to know what both of us did. He took that in, even though it was sports, and he channeled it into the school, and he really turned that school around. And so being able to be a part of some of those things was great. But when we did that, we made Custer hard to close.
Yeah.
We were the only school to get off the federal failing schools list. That was not a magnet school for that district. So it literally doesn't mean that you made everybody pass whatever they needed to. It meant you didn't continually slide. You reversed a trend.
Yeah.
And so we managed to do that. And we know now why, because ultimately a few years later they cut Custer, but they started driving out all the people who had success, and they did. They successfully put us out. Well, look, this school's not popular anymore, and they shut it down. And another challenge for me is staying quiet when I see a problem. So, I wasn't going to sit back and say nothing at times, and certainly neither was the principal I worked for. And he was also moved out after doing that. It was almost criminal the way that the school was treated. It was a dumping ground. And when you dare challenge that, you see what happens. So as much as it was a low light leaving, it was also a highlight because, it had huge news coverage when I went. The district ultimately got caught in a legit conspiracy between central office and a couple other people that had moved me out. And I had an investigation done by a woman who went on to some pretty big things in journalism, and she cracked it and published the story, and it had huge headline taken down. And it was at our going away party with the boys that I had coached for those years. So high and low, like you realize the impact you have in those moments. But I moved to Florida at that point and kind of started over and was the National Coach of the Year by Sports Illustrated and 2 years later. So it's at the end of our first year, actually, at Jensen Beach High School in Florida, and started that program. And I'm super proud because after starting that program, they've now won, this is years after I left. I was there for 2 years. They've had a guy there now for probably 15 years, and they've won a bunch of state team titles. They've really thrived. So I gave them a really good start is what I helped them with. And Tom McMath has done a great job there and it's like local pride. So that program really blew up. I'm super proud of that. So I got that award, but also had an administration that was really shady. And so I did 2 years there and moved on to Dwyer High School, where I got a chance to coach on a football team that turned out 12 players to the NFL on a state championship team. And I coached a couple of them as freshmen, but usually not very long. They would usually get moved up. And so got some neat things to do there. And then we turned that program around within a year. Low light, that was the worst season. The first season there, it was the worst season I've ever coached. I didn't know if I could go back for another one because it was so bad the first year. But we did things right, and within a year we had turned it around, and then had a ton of success where we were in the top 5 in the state. A little bit later, one of those athletes made it to the UFC, and I had a big part of that, continuing to coach him going forward after that experience. So that was definitely a big deal. But I hit a point in my career where it kind of had to get forced to a screeching halt because in 2007, I injured my spine and had no clue the severity. And as a wrestling coach, I heard it literally 2 days before our season started, not knowing I had herniated 4 discs and ruptured 2 more. And I coached a season on that. And when it was over, one of the boys I used to coach from Milwaukee was visiting with me, and he came to see me in Florida and recognized just watching me walk and then wrestling. And are you okay? like I'm falling and stuff. And like, there's things, and you just kind of put it out of your mind, but my legs would give out. I was facing potential paralysis. It was so bad. And it was so many discs in a row. And then there was one that was higher that was obliterated. Well, all coaching came to a halt. I had a 3 vertebrae fusion. That was life-altering also. It's like a very big, like, midpoint in life and career. I didn't know if I could ever walk normally again. The bolt was 6 inches long. They put 4 screws in initially. The surgery had to be tweaked twice after they had done it. And here's the real kicker. The surgeon that did it ended up in prison for using fake parts.
Oh my gosh.
So, Coley White, and it made national news. He had was a surgeon. And so, I had a real decision to make. I was recovering. We had moved back to Wisconsin at that point, and life at home was not good. And it wasn't good through most of this on a personal level, but I had channeled it into work and was able to build a lot of success. Now I can't do that anymore. And so it really threw a year or two off into a tailspin. And while I was going through the rehab, and I was in a warm pool with elderly people, and I'm going through this and going, all right, well, I have to, can't do this in open air. My hamstrings had completely contracted. It was difficult to walk, even though they had done the surgery and started to fix things. I was in this pool with elderly people, and I'm struggling. And I remember I was pretty mad at the world at that point. I'm not going to lie. I was like, this has been a lot of drama. And so what's the craziest thing I could make a goal? Because here I am, like, you don't get lower really if you've been in combat sports as a coach and a tough wrestler for years. And now I'm going, this is what it's down to. What's the craziest goal I could make? So in that moment, I said, I'm going to go into mixed martial arts fighting, and I'm going to make that a goal, even if it's coaching. I didn't intend to be a fighter. I wanted to get in good enough shape that I could. And right before I hurt my back, about a year before that, I was called by now a very well-known commentator named Dean Thomas. Dean Thomas is a cage-side analyst for the UFC now, but he was an active UFC roster fighter at that point. He saw the award I won while I was at Jensen Beach, and he lived 5 minutes from there. So he got a hold of the school and had me come up, and I had never even so much watched professional fighting. But I didn't have the time, being honest, with young kids and everything else. And it was a new sport. So I didn't know much, if anything, about it. And I certainly didn't know how big of a deal he was at that point in time. And so I started to work with him, and I think I was with him for 2 or 3 fight camps to help him with wrestling. And I was learning I would argue I was learning way more from him. He had, I was helping him, but I was definitely going, my God, I kind of like this. Like, it makes sense to me. I didn't know much about it, but it was fascinating to me. And so I was pretty excited about continuing that in. And then when my back went out, it just came to a complete halt. So that had been planted for me. And so it wasn't like it was just random, but I definitely went, I'm young, I'm 37 years old. At that point, I think I could find a way to at least become productive in it. What's the best way to do that? So I was also working on a few other things. Ultimately, I was able to recover enough. I was doing physical therapy, and I was in nowhere near good enough shape yet to be entering a gym. And I got hired as a wrestling coach to work with little kids. That was initially, it was going to be like 2 or 3 hours a week. But the guy that was there had a profound effect on me, named Reese Shaner. And he just kind of each day pushed me a little more into doing stuff. And the next thing I know, I'm in a practice with the MMA team, getting head kicked and telling somebody they did a great job and they should do it again. And I'm like, because I'm in coach mode, I'm like, I just told the dude who kicked me in the head that was good. And I'm like, well, I'm probably not supposed to be here, but you want to go home and you got to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Well, you get kicked in the head and you go, good job, keep doing that. I could go in, I'm like, I have a degree from a respectable college, and I'm sitting here telling the dude that just kicked me in the head, great job, keep it up. So, but I loved it. And I liked being able to start getting into it. So he was so good at it was never too much, even though it probably was. He literally just kind of nudged me. And the next thing I know, I'm in cardio classes and then breezing through them. And I ended up arguably in the best shape I've ever been in during that time, and started sparring and started actually, I wanted to take a fight, but the surgery that I had basically nixed that. But I definitely got in enough shape. I did an exhibition thing and got to start playing around with it. And I won the exhibition fight. And it was just something to horse around with. It wasn't legit. You couldn't hit anybody in the head in those fights. So it wasn't fulfilling, but I wanted to just continue to stay active in it. And, so I learned a lot from Reese on life and everything else, and parenting, everything. And we lost him tragically in a motorcycle accident in 2015. Even though it was tragic, it definitely good came from it, because I was picked up by one of a huge gym called Rufus Sport. And so Rufus Sport's one of the top gyms in the world. And, Duke, Rufus, the owner, was very close friends with Reese. So he picked me and two of our fighters up, and I came on as a coach. And I'm now working with people who I'm watching actively on TV fight. It's a surreal experience when you go through that. And, it was fascinating. And one of the early assignments I got was with a gentleman named Phil Brooks, whose stage name is CM Punk. He has repeatedly been the WWE champion. Now it's staged wrestling. I can't call it fake. I know the injuries he carried in with it, because that was all being treated. He had worked through so much stuff, so much adversity. And that was one of the early fights I got tasked with working on. And that was one of the most watched fights in the history of the league at that point, because it was so weird. He had been a champion of this simulated sport, really, and was going to go in and take a real fight. And they didn't give him a pushover. He got somebody who's still in the UFC today. That was 2016. That guy is still, that he fought is still in the league. So he was going up against the real monster, and we kind of knew it wasn't going to end well. He's almost too nice of a guy. One of my favorite experiences was working with him. And it really opened my eyes to being in the spotlight a bit more, having to sign an NDA and all these things that we couldn't, talk about it at all. But hey, look who I'm working with, until he started to post pictures and stuff. And he could, but we had to go and stay super quiet about it. I had a blast working with him. It was so much fun. The school I worked at cut me a break to go leave on Fridays to go do their professional practice. I had to go back and stay late, but it was like they let me do those things. So I got a chance to work with people that are, two of them that we're around with every day. And not that I had a huge impact on their career by any means, but Tyron Woodley and Anthony Pettis won world titles while I was there, or had them. Anthony had it, Tyron won one. So just the sheer opportunity. That's the toughest human being in the world right now. And you get to see how they live during that time, and how they approach training, and what they actually do to go into their craft, how much work they go in. I watched some stuff and watched, some of these guys who are the best in the world get pieced apart by a 50-year-old kickboxer when they were doing that discipline, because they're better at it than that person. But if it was an open fight, it's different. But you're getting to see that person get beat, and get beat handily in another discipline that nobody else really gets to witness. And it really gives you an appreciation for the guys that can get there and to do it. And I was fascinated by getting to that level. I wanted to corner fights in the league, and it became, I don't want to say an obsession, but I loved working in the mixed martial arts world. It was so fun to work on high level fights, and it took a while. You don't just kind of get to stumble into those. And so ultimately, after several years, the fighter that I went from Reese to Duke with went to that gym, and then we left. I left and took a job with another gym, and he ultimately, about a couple months later, followed me over there. 1 year after he joined that gym, we got him to the UFC. I got to be there when it happened, and then got to corner a bunch of his fights in the league, which led to working with others. So I had already cornered one at that point in 2018, and got a chance to do it, and it was awesome. Like I love something about, as opposed to being at a gym with some cross-eyed JV kids that are out there, it's just, you're there and you're getting to do some neat stuff. And I know that fighter that was with me, he had his debut in front of, tens of millions of people on the main card of a Conor McGregor pay-per-view. He was his debut fight. So we got to experience, and it wasn't planned. They moved him up there the night of the weigh-in because somebody fell through on a fight. So his debut was supposed to be seen by maybe 100,000 people on the app, is now in front of the world. And it didn't end well. We didn't win. But I learned so much from that loss and the magnitude of it and what fighters will go through, what you never see. His girlfriend at the time got mad at him that night when he was meeting with fans for not giving him enough attention. And I remember just thinking, like, now he's dealing with this, like he's gracefully lost, is meeting with the people who flew there, sponsors. You have to do that stuff. After 50 million people watched you have the worst night of your life, you have to go be a respectable person, talk to people. And so there's all this stuff that goes into it. I just remember feeling like I had a great appreciation for it. It's like coaching to a degree. Like, you do so much stuff behind the scenes. And I learned so much from working with those pro fighters, and had some that really stood out. And it was a blast. I got to deal with, some of it was heartbreaking too. It's you can't go into that and think it's going to always be that you're going to win. And when you lose, it sucks. CM Punk, we braced for it. Knew it wasn't going to probably go well. My wife, on the other hand, who had met him and watched him at practices and knew how hard he worked because she had been at some of those things, was in Florida away from me and was sobbing just because, saw him get beat and knew what went into it. And so you see that when you see a person who's not in it have that reaction to it because they were a part of it, and see the little stuff and how, even how graceful he was after he lost, and the speech he gave, I would argue, is one of the best I've heard, and kind of embraced a lot of that. He said that it's probably funny to hear from somebody who just had his ass kicked in front of the world that it's the greatest night of his life, but other than marrying his wife, it was the greatest night of his life. And I thought I understood it at the time, and then ultimately later getting to fight at age 49 and knowing there wasn't going to probably be any more, definitely was able to carry that spirit into doing that. So the MMA stuff is interesting. It's so primal, and like there's a cage door closed with one person in there to make sure nobody dies. There's rules to enforce, so because the end result would be if you didn't let go of a choke, that person's not gonna live. And it's funny because in other sports like baseball, it's to go make a call, but your job in that cage as a ref is to go in and stop these guys from being able to kill each other. And being around people that are capable of that level of violence and seeing how not violent they were. Like, you would think that that's how they exist as people, and most of them are the most peaceful human beings you will meet. They're just really, really good at violence, which I would argue probably makes them really good at peace, because you kind of know how things would end if something wasn't going to be peaceful, and you can get a zen from that.
So, wow, that was so amazing. That was such a ride. I know there's so much more there that we're still going to talk about. We're not done career and highlights and where you went next. But I want to pause and bring you back. You mentioned a couple of times during that about family life, about just briefly starting to mention fatherhood and your wife. So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about the impact of fatherhood. Tell us the whole story.
So I was married for 14 years and with the same person for 19 total. And I decided that I wanted a bit more out of life, and made the decision. It was a hard decision to leave in 2012. And so we had been together since college, but there was just a lot of general issues, and it was never going to get better. And I started to realize that the thing that scared me the most, honestly, with becoming a parent on that front, was my kids had kind of turned us into Camelot, and we're getting to an age where they're younger, would have aspired to it. I wanted them to aspire to something way more real and happy and mutually rewarding and beneficial for both parties. And I think I reached a point where I realized that wasn't the case. I became a father in 2001 to Xander. Xander is in the U.S. Air Force right now. He's stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I'm excited because I'll get to see him before this month is up. He's coming down to visit late September. So yeah, becoming a parent at that point was super impactful. I was glad I was already coaching, because if I had tried to go and add coaching after that, I don't think I would have been able to, but you kind of learn to build it into your life when it happens. And one of the nice things about teaching is you get a lot of time off in summers and everything else. So you can kind of be the lead on a lot of things that you might have missed out for otherwise. So Xander was born in 2001. He was nearly deceased when he was born. So he kind of miracle baby to us. Xander had descended too quickly and got choked out by the umbilical cord. And so it was pretty severe. And he spent his first week in the NICU. And it was an interesting way to have him enter the world. But he has grown up to be just an amazing kid. And I was really blessed that he didn't do any of the stupidity things that I did to my parents, or things I put them through, or he was a great kid. And I had a lot of really amazing experiences with him. I got to be his teacher for his his senior year. Yeah, he transferred to the inner city school where I worked. He wanted to experience that life, and so I got to be his coach for 2 years, and his teacher. Being his teacher was way better than being his coach. We both kind of laugh about it now. Coaching him was tough. I didn't coach him growing up. I wanted to be dad. It was very specific, so I wasn't quick to go sign up to be the flag football coach or the little league coach. I wanted to be dad with him. And I'm very, very thankful that I did that. He did end up in wrestling, but not until at a much later age. 8th grade was when he kind of started to really want to do it. I wanted him to choose to do it, not to go do the automatic, well, I did this and it's the family business, you're going into it. Yeah. I wanted him to want to do it. So yeah, he's an amazing kid. Had also off the wall ADHD when he was young. Got nicknamed Zoom Zoom at daycare. All over the place. It was impressive, actually. Get out of packing plays at a way early age, crawled out of his crib all the time. Holding him in was a challenge, but you never know that now, but yeah, it definitely was.
Wow. I love it. I can picture it. And you said that, so he was 2001, did you say? Yes.
And then my daughter was born in 2004. She was born, right at the time I was being let go by Milwaukee Public Schools.
Oh, wow.
I was actually on FMLA for the birth of my daughter, and the paperwork that got found said I had faked the birth of my daughter.
Oh my gosh.
So the lawsuit that ensued was benefiting from some of that stuff and being able to go, no, here she is. It wasn't fake.
Oh my gosh.
But I had, it was a long story with them, but it was not difficult to prove that my daughter was actually born, and so that got settled pretty quickly after that. But, so she entered at a pretty tough time. We moved to Florida when she was a few months old. So we moved across the country, and I took a position down there at a brand new high school. And then I can remember, though, she was really a lot of the impetus. But when my back went bad, I couldn't bend over to pick her up.
Oh, right.
I remember she was real young, and I was like, that was one of my driving goals of like, I can't have this at 37 years old. Yeah. I want to go and be more viable throughout her childhood. So she was, she's a great kid. She's at art college in Milwaukee right now. We're a little bit alienated, though. Unfortunately, when you leave somebody with pretty strong narcissistic traits, whether that's a full-blown disorder or not, some folks turn children into weapons and make it a contest. And I was on the wrong end of that. And that really defined the tail end of my career in mixed martial arts, because as I was kind of wrapping everything up and realizing I needed to start shifting into something that maybe wasn't beating me up all the time, that happened. And that was probably the most challenging thing I've ever had to deal with. It still is. I mean, it's ongoing, so it's tough. But when you really go down the rabbit hole and realize how it was all set up and how things years ago played into this, and how flying monkeys participate, where you've got your little helper friends and family that can go and be very toxic while you're not around. I fell on the wrong side of that. And it's something that I'm super passionate about now. And I've done a lot of work helping other people who are in those situations. Once you've gone through it, you know exactly what signs to look for.
Yeah.
You know exactly how it all gets shaped. I mean, it's stuff that fits some of those narcissistic traits like a glove,
Yeah.
but it's, you know, tough to go and label somebody, but you can definitely use it as a guide to go, oh, that's probably what kind of fed some of that. And it was brutally hard. And so that kind of marked the end. But, you know, I was a big girl dad, so I've done the doll playing and all that stuff. And, you know, loved having a girl, and I'm getting a chance really right now. You know, I left the marriage in 2012, and we had 50-50 custody throughout up until the last year.
Okay.
That was when that changed. So it was like there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and kind of jumped for it. But there are a bunch of other factors at play. You know, very fearful of things like her orientation coming out, which I knew about, but the other family didn't. And then when mom found out, it didn't end well. More about a fear of how she would be perceived by the flying monkeys she employed.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was something that I was very proud of my parenting, that my kids could come to me with things like that, which she did previously. My son had come to me when he wanted to, you know, try drinking. And so I was like, all right, well, you know, we did that at home a little bit to go get him a dabble. And by not having those restrictions, they didn't fall into those cruxes where they went and had to sneak anything. And I was very happy about that. They made much better decisions, both of them, than I ever did at that age. So I was very appreciative of that. And it was easier to parent, I think, because I had to be a father figure to so many other kids prior and alongside of it. So
that's right.
You know, it was neat to get Xander to see the inside of what I did, because he had seen the coaching part of it,
right,
but not to really see the day-to-day interactions. And we had some really funny moments when he was at school there, being the two of us there. So it was, I had a blast being a parent. I loved being a parent, and I loved it, I'll be honest, a lot more after the divorce, because I felt like I wasn't being continually undermined, at least not in my presence anymore. And that was a huge upswing. And I didn't date right away after that. I kind of knew better than to fall into that trap. And so I waited a year and then entered the dating pool, and found that to be almost as scary in some cases. Dating at 40 was not necessarily a real fun experience. And it kind of like, I didn't really know where that was going to go forward. And then found out that a former coworker of mine in Florida, now I lived in Wisconsin at the time, found out that a former coworker of mine had become single, and through a Facebook post. And I was teaching adults how to write for mass media. And I was using social media. I had to pause my screen and move it up and sent a Facebook message within, I think it was under a minute. And said, "I'm really sorry to hear you're single," and started off with a lie, which I think she figured out was probably the case. But yeah, we started talking that day, and even though we lived 1,200 miles apart, we were married 5 months later.
Wow.
So 7 years. And now, after kind of being, I don't know, I felt like I kind of lost out on the last couple years of stuff with my daughter, and it was painful to miss out on. But I get to do girl dad stuff down here because she's got a daughter named Molly, and I've known Molly since she was 4.
Yeah.
So even though I was the fun, 1,200 mile away stepdad that she didn't see all the time, we kind of eased in with me even moving down here full time. We didn't just spring into it. We had me come down more and more, increased amounts of time before I just up and moved. And so we did the distance until literally the day that my son went to the Air Force. My daughter graduated a day before that. My son went off to the Air Force, and I was on a plane the next day to kind of officially move down here, and kind of waited to sell the house a bit. But I went from Milwaukee to Fort Pierce, Florida, and we were knew how to reverse engineer marriage. So did it completely non-traditionally, and both just hit a point where just kind of threw everything to the side and said, I'm going to just enter this completely real. Yeah. It worked. And I knew immediately. I don't know how, but I couldn't have ever said this prior to this. I always thought I knew, but I kind of know I knew I didn't. I guess I didn't really have enough confidence to act on stuff that were clearly pointing at like a giant neon sign, like don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Those signs were there early. And so I own that. Like I saw enough. I didn't have the confidence to go and really jump on anything like that and go, you know what? No, I think I deserve better. And so I think the long process, you learn to love yourself enough to not tolerate it anymore. And then to love yourself enough to go, I'm not going to jump back into that mistake again. So the one thing I think was branded with going into being single, I looked at it, I'm like, I'm not repeating that mistake. I am not. So it made me look pretty, I'm sure probably pretty cold a few times, but needed to know I was never going to go and repeat that. And when you see people do that and they go and they get out of what is bad, we've watched this happen a few times. And, now you kind of learn to have the vision for it. And you're like, no, that's the same thing you left. Don't do that. No. Yeah. So you can't stop people from it. But I've definitely tried, whether it's the alienation or on the front end when there's, talking to young men who are about to become professional athletes about like, those signs are familiar. That shouldn't happen with somebody that you're going to marry, and trying to really help them make good decisions because they have a big target on their back at that point. So I didn't have anybody to guide me on those things really. And so I tried to be that resource for others, even in leaving. And now I know what it looks like. Yeah. So when you talk to somebody who's telling you, I don't know, like, no, that's really bad. You shouldn't allow that. And, I'm proud of that for the two of us that we were both able to recognize it. But, we were able to roll it in. And one of the funniest parts is, we approached it going, this is different. And I had my friends from middle school, the super successful ones, did an intervention with me before we got married because they were worried that this sounded crazy. And they remembered how tough the divorce was and like, hey, we just want to make sure you're good. Like this is told him, he said, listen, I understand. I appreciate the concern. Yeah. Meet her once. I don't think you're going to feel that way. And that was exactly how it played out. They're now close with her as friends also. And it was tough to explain to people how distinctly you just look at somebody and go, you know too. You see the same thing I do right now. And I had never had that experience before, not ever. So, and we knew each other. So we weren't actually even super close. We were work friends. And even that's loose. I helped her. We knew each other. She was an inexperienced teacher. She left TV news to do TV and video production. And so nobody told her that these little things are assholes that are in your class and how bad they're going to be assholes. And so I had dealt with obviously chaos working in inner city environments. And this school for sure wasn't that environment. It was at a beautiful beach town, brand new $95 million building. Kids mostly have parents at home, but they were very entitled as well. And the entitled can be very mean when you're a beginning teacher. And I knew her because she was struggling. That's how I got to know her. And so with that, I just kind of felt like, I knew her enough to know that she wasn't going to go key my car or do something off, really off. Like, I guess, and when I had never had that experience before either, really dating where I knew somebody kind of for a while first, even though we weren't super close friends. It was a unique experience, but I think it cut through a lot of the initial questioning and wondering right away. Yeah. And, legit, like I can say, quite honestly, we're absolute best friends. So when you have that too, and it's funny being around a lot of super successful people between working in cannabis who have a lot of money and then friends who have made a lot. And some of them are super happy and some of them are stuck in some apathy. And I think I wouldn't trade this for anything. I think it's possible to certainly have both. But when you go and you see people that have all that stuff and they're not happy at all, or you see them continually in tough situations and just going through heartbreak, it just makes you appreciate, like, I would never swap this for a thing. It's been transformative to be able to exist and not be undermined. It makes being a girl dad so fun right now. I get to, just about every morning, and now Molly's 13 and she's my height. All right. So mind you, she's, She might not be my daughter, but I get to walk her to school just about every day. It's a block and a half away. She's not embarrassed enough of us yet to not have us do that. And, is appreciative when somebody's there to pick her up. And it's certainly not a safety factor. She'd be fine walking out, home, but I'm getting to do a lot of those little things, even if it means I've got to understand some stuff about Taylor Swift or whatever else is trending at the moment. But yeah, it was, it's really like unexpected to be able to get all of that opportunity to make up for some of that ground. And, we're super close, and we've got our own little traditions when Jenny leaves town. To just kind of celebrate how naughty I was growing up. We go steal street cones and bring them back and put them in funny places in the house, because that was something we would do for stupid fun. So we've street cone Jenny enough. She's asked for it not to happen anymore, but Molly and I definitely have a routine if we're going to be spending some time alone together. And it's been a blast. I really, really have a good time with her. And she's an amazing kid, the easiest child I've ever been around. So that's also really nice. And I've been around a lot of kids, thousands, and is literally the easiest person I've ever seen at that age to be around. So Jenny's also very fortunate. She's done an amazing job. Not with always the greatest support network, and has really created an incredible child in Molly. So it's been really enjoyable to get to redo some of those things that, even if there is a negative of losing out, life has a funny way of working itself out to provide some stuff that's cathartic. I really appreciate that.
Wow. And that was really well said.
And now for a word from our sponsors. Ready to share your stories and life philosophy, or capture those of a parent or grandparent? Or maybe a corporate package is right for you to build connection across your workforce and add value to your clients. Visit audiolife.io today to learn more. Our listeners will get 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. AudioLife, where memories find their voice.
Well, thank you for all of that. Let's pop back. So you talked a little bit about, you referenced what you do for work now. So we were just in your professional career, we were just coming to the end of your MMA career. You said you work in cannabis now. Take us through that.
All right. So a couple things started happening. So I had never used cannabis until 2016. When Duke Rufus, the famous fight coach I worked for, my dad was dying of cancer, and I wasn't sleeping well. I was in Milwaukee, and I was having to handle a lot of it where his treatments were. So he, and Duke, we knew each other, we were friends, and he looked at me. He's like, "You sleeping all right?" I'm like, "No," and he knew what was going on. Yeah. And he asked me if I used cannabis. I said no, and he turned around, and looked at me like I was an alien. He's like, "You're not sleeping, but you don't use cannabis." Yeah. Yes. He's like, "Why the hell not?" And he just gave me a look, and I just had to think about it. I'm like, I don't really know. I guess best I could do is I tried to set an example for the boys I coached. And so I didn't do things I didn't expect them to do. Drinking with an exception because of Wisconsin. You just can't get rid of that in Wisconsin. So that's not going to go. But I didn't think it would be right to do that. And he looked at me and he's like, "And how many high school kids are you coaching right now?" None. It's like, none of the professional athletes you coach in that locker room right now, all of them use some form of CBD or cannabis. You need to go in there, ask one of them to give you a portion of theirs, go home and get some sleep. So that kind of opened my eyes to it. But for the first, I'd say 2 years, I didn't leave the house after using it. I would use it literally just to go to sleep. And I look back at how ridiculous that was now. But I approach things super cautiously. And so kind of learned to kind of slowly go into it. And then was definitely a fan. And continued to teach and was kind of sliding out of the coaching. And in a year ago, this is in September last year, it was actually it was late August. I had moved to Florida. I was in the process of transferring my teaching license. I had a temporary one to work at a school and had finished up the school year and intended to go back. That's when the law climate changed here in Florida. So Florida passed a bill called the Don't Say Gay bill, which made it illegal, against the law, punishable under law, to reference anything in regards to that, into homosexuality, but also as deep as to go, if you put a picture of, say, if I put up a picture of a relative with their significant other and it's a same-sex couple, you could be fired and prosecuted. But it didn't end there. And certainly I was upset with that and found it bluntly pretty fascist. But where it touched home for me is they banned Black history. And it's not conjecture. It's not anything that anybody's overhyping. They literally made anything you mention have to go through filtration. And I looked at my wife and I'm like, I'll be arrested before the end of the first day.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going, this is going to happen. I'm going to end up in trouble. And if this was 10 years ago, actually even a little bit more than that, I guess I've been out for a little bit longer than that now. But if this was at peak bad marriage, and so, all right, man, make me the poster child for the First Amendment and I'll take this head on. But I don't want to do that now. And as much as I'm horrified by it, I made the decision I couldn't work in a system like that, and that the system ultimately needed me more than I needed them. But that then leads you to go, so I left education. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I made a commitment. I'm not going to do it. It doesn't mean I hated education. I've never not liked teaching. Always loved working with kids. That's never waned. And I didn't leave over inability to control class. But I had to make a principled decision. And now, there might be people listening to this that go, well, there's this. It's if you're in that position and they literally are going to tell you what you can or can't say. Just about, like, not whether or not it's true, that was too much for me. And I was like, I'm going to get off this train now. And so I applied for a job to sell cannabis dispensaries, and never done anything like that. But I'm like, what are the odds I'm going to end up with this? Well, that's what I ended up with, because it's tough leaving education. Like, people don't respect enough how many other job skills you do every single day. Stuff people can't fathom, just on a customer service level, the stuff that you have to do interacting with parents and principals and people in the community and other aspects to it. There's so many more things than just, I stand up there and talk to people. So I didn't find it real easy to find anything right away. So I applied for that. But at the same time, when I got hired, I started to think about my own use with cannabis. And I now was using a lot more frequently, and would use it for different tasks, and started to use it to treat medical issues. But I had to figure all of that out on my own. And I wasn't a real fan of that. So I found myself at another crossroads. I think the biggest one since I had injured my spine. And compounding this was through a routine x-ray, found out that the bolt in my back is broken in half.
Oh my goodness.
So now going back to a regular job is now suspect at best. So had to make the decision, one, I'm going to need to get to where I can at least try some things where I can work from home. So we did that with the cannabis sales. I started a business and then launched a project. So we just went and shot for 3 things, like throwing some stuff up against the wall. And some's taken, some hasn't. But when you take on big projects, and I've done this in the past, you learn it's not going to happen the next day.
Yeah.
You're going to have to go and have some things fall into place for you. So the first thing I did was take the job selling dispensaries. And I've learned the industry from the inside out, because I'm very fortunate. I'm on Zoom calls with owners of dispensary chains, people worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, these are big players in the game, finding out how all this chain works, all this stuff in the industry. And there's no other way to get that experience. So even though when I got started, I wasn't selling very much, I was taking a ton of info in. Mm-hmm. And one of the early meetings, a CEO who's going to be opening a dispensary talked about the challenges and how going forward with the biggest thing that he sees as a trend is education in cannabis. Because if you look at it like your grandpa's plant, it's not a one size fits all. These strains all do different things. And some of the ones that are supposed to make you tired don't. Some of the ones that stimulate your brain and make you more alert don't. There's a difference. And so there's a whole developing possibility of actually really aligning strains and how best to use them to treat medical issues. Yeah. And I would argue not just medical issues, because a lot of the people, when it goes federally legal, won't need to get a medical card. And so, but they're still going to need the information to treat it medically if you're going to use it for anything like PTSD or trauma. So if you're a veteran that's been through bad PTSD, you can't just take any cannabis, because if it stokes your anxiety, which it can, you need to know which ones don't. And that's almost, I wouldn't call, might be life or death for that person if they have bad flashbacks and those types of things. So I started to really look into it and decided, you know what, I think I'm going to start a nonprofit. I think we could do an education nonprofit. And here's where this fits into the world of cannabis. And it's a little bit, again, it's reverse engineering. Here's the parameters, and they show you what you can't do. What you can't do in most states is effectively market your strains.
Yes.
They're prohibited. So with the strains, you can only basically mention them. You might be able to talk about benefits, but you have to be, I don't know, I guess very concise about it, not very detailed. And there's not been a lot of studies done on all these strains. They're still in the mode where it's our users report this.
Yep.
We need to do better than that. And so I started looking, I'm like, well, if that's the rabbit hole we go down, we should be able to do it as a nonprofit. So we got approved to exist as a cannabis education 501c3 nonprofit. So the structure that we want to fit in is basically the barrier of here's what they say you can't say.
Yeah.
You can't put a logo. You can't make it look like it's going to be attractive to children and all this. Well, I don't find those being very tough parameters, but they're tough to risk for the dispensary, because they could get in a lot of trouble if somebody had an attitude about it or thought you were trying to cater to kids and you weren't. So they're in a tough spot because they can't really effectively market their products the way they should. I look at this, okay, well, that's a regulation. They might not be able to, but if they hire us as personnel to test their products and then to set up data collection, we could go and do some of that marketing for them if we created a podcast, called it a podcast, and basically said, we'll test your strains and we'll name that episode after your strain with no affiliation to you in terms of, other than we could talk about where we got it from, but in terms of the advertising, that's our advertising. And on the backside of it is a data card that they can, so they can hand out all of these like nice artwork, old historic themes. Because I would argue, as a history teacher, kids don't come to your class super anxious to see old newspapers and stuff and old pictures until you kind of make it interesting. And so we made kind of a historical backing where we tie into local stuff, but as well as cannabis history, and use that as the backdrop for what we're doing. And then, using my historical research skills that I got for years to come up with a unique image for that, put it on the front. It might have the name of the strain, but those strains can carry, in most cases, the same name at different dispensaries. So we can do that there and have the person, if they take the card home and they quick fill it out and say, this did this for me, this did this for me, we can then provide the data collection. But along the way, record all of the tests and go do stupid things like get very, very high and watch Hoarders and see how funny you're going to make it. Like, it might sound silly, but there's things that I wanted to test, like my ability to create humor. Am I funnier if I am I not as funny? Then you start to get more serious about it and going, when I work out, is my workout better or worse when I do this? So, I've got some unique medical concerns to consider now at this point. And it broke at a disc. So I'm not in constant, really horrible pain. We don't even know when it broke. It might have broke a while ago. But I know when I started training for the fight I decided to take at age 49, I was using it religiously to deal with the pain afterwards or just recovery. I was using it occasionally before I would train. One of my regrets from my coaching career is I didn't use it and legit coach like at the gyms, because I was respectful of the gym, probably not wanting their coach to show up high. Then it was funny because in mixed martial arts, it's kind of super accepted, but I always approached it like a professional coach, as a high school coach. I felt like, and I didn't need it to typically do that, but I do wish I might have dabbled with that a little bit, because it did definitely make me a more creative coach at home, figuring out what I was going to do. So there's things I'm marveling at how much easier they are, but also what not to do when you're on it. So, it's a tricky thing to go say, I want to test driving on this. We haven't done this yet, but under controlled circumstances, test driving skills without putting anybody's lives at risk and do it on a track and figure out like, what does this actually improve? But what that lets you do is create content that the dispensary gets in return, and they can use it for their stuff. We could use it for ours.
Yeah.
But all the while it's a tax write-off and basically a charitable donation in effect, but for services. And it doesn't hurt. My wife is she's the head of PR at a water utility, almost done with her CPRC, should be done within a couple of weeks. And she's got her APR. So we have some legit backing behind the PR. I'm a hack. So I'm really good with graphic arts, but I'm completely self-taught. And I got good with the historical research, and I got good with transforming that stuff as a teacher by including it as tech. So I would teach Canva. I was teaching Canva in 2017 and 2018 to students on how to turn real history into content. So that's how these skills kind of got developed, because I started doing it in class, and I would always do a model for the kids and create these things. And it really got me pretty good at it and doing some unique stuff, because I know how to research and find things that maybe somebody else might not, and to verify certain things that they really happen. So like with the articles, one of the things I love doing is calling it history. We've got a bunch of areas where we can measure things. The history isn't really a measurement tool, but it's one of the activities that we do. And I've done this several times where I will read out loud in a special reading voice that's very surprised at all of this, with articles about cannabis from when it was completely misconstrued as making you murderous, and the way that they spoke about it was so ridiculous. And I really feel like people need to know the history of this plant to actually understand why the kid gloves are being held. It's been lied about since its discovery, and people knew. They knew it was a beneficial item to your health. They knew a long time ago. So like if you go back into the 1800s, late 1800s, you could buy sativa and indica oil to help with certain things, cholera, other things they considered that it was able to treat. And now on a weekly basis, there are studies coming out, because even foreign countries are just now being able to extensively study it and finding, oh my God, this has legit major medical implications. And we're on the beginning end of that. So both as the investment front, because I found this fascinating, because it's about to really explode when it goes federally legal. That's going to be a next big step. And then banks should be able to, not long after that, be able to put the money up. Because as of now, you can't go to a PNC and go, hey, I'm going to open a dispensary. You want to finance this for me? They can't do it. They're not allowed to, because it's a Schedule I drug. So, getting a chance to really learn the industry from the inside, and then along with it, carrying through understanding of history. I'm working right now to try to align with a couple of dispensaries where we do this work, evaluate strains, and do it as a third party. You can have the company can go do it all they want, but nobody's going to buy into it if it wasn't third party. I think it has to be. And in doing it for legitimate study reasons, going, did I improve on this? If I didn't, hey, it doesn't mean they shouldn't use it. It might be your best party time. Go to sleep on. It's not saying it doesn't have a use, but just using it practically to share with people. And again, I didn't have that. And one of the things that was like, I guess, a hallmark of my career was when I didn't have something, I didn't want anybody else to go through some of that. I'd rather have them get the support and resources. And I really feel that way now after starting a business, because there's not always a lot of help when you're going into it. And it was a new entity for both of us when we opened this. And on top of my wife doesn't use, she's tried, she has terrible reactions to it. She's pretty clearly got an allergy to it. And so we've even seen that side of it. And there's probably going to be a point in the future where we start interviewing the doctors who prescribe this stuff and having her go through and see if they can provide reasons why. When I got my card, it was rubber stamping, and it's not the way it's supposed to be. And when people who have a medical card are going, hey, wait, you should, I didn't want you to rubber stamp it. I wanted you to say, hey, this is some really helpful stuff. This is my favorite dispensary. This is the people, what they tell me you should do, or even if that's the extent it goes. But if you're a doctor, you shouldn't have bud tenders that know more than you do. And that's the legitimacy right now of the cannabis industry, is that these bud tenders, who are the most underpaid, are the front of the education front. So they're the head. So they're out in front. So education almost has to come through them. And one of the things that I think would be really ironic for this is I think we could really replicate the model with different dispensaries or different areas, and have bud tenders buy into being a part of it. We want to celebrate bud tenders with this because there's no way around it. They're going to be the face of where people get their cannabis from. So they're going to be the education front. They're going to be the ones that actually provide that insight and that input. And, they're the lowest paid. So when you have your well, we know this from America, when your educators are your lowest paid, it leads to problems. So, we need to somehow go and tie that in. And I think this could also allow them to make extra money ultimately. And they're doing it through an industry where the dispensary is really not paying it. So that's stuff that I really think is, I guess, I don't know if brilliance is right because it hasn't taken off so well yet. We're in that process and we've made some headway, but what we really need is alignments with dispensaries to go do this. And I think would be very impressed with what we could do, but it's also not one of those things that's going to reflect immediately. It takes time to collect data and do those things. You could start it fairly quickly and get stuff out there. And I also think it'd provide some support for some other tough businesses. Smoke shops, what a horribly tough business right now. If you're in New Jersey, they banned the stuff yesterday with hemp that was legal a day ago. Like, what you did to make your money in some states can change overnight. California is about to start that too. So there's going to be businesses that still have a niche and a place in here, but they need sometimes, I think, some affordable PR, and we're on the beginning end of doing it on our own. So I feel like we can find a niche with this and help dispensaries advertise their products and do it as a tax write-off.
Yes. Yeah.
But do nobody a disservice in that process. Yeah. You're helping to educate your customers, and I think that's where we can win.
So interesting, and that really strong, theme. You're a born educator, or at least at some point in your very early, late teens, early 20s, you became an educator. You have, in all of these different chapters of your life and focuses, you've reverse engineered, right? You've really looked at what didn't work, what did work, and made sense of it. I think there's also this theme of like feeding forward, of sharing lessons learned that's really strong, both as an educator, but as a person, and what you've done. And you've really pulled it into this experience. You talked about making a hard decision to step back from formal, like as a formal educator, and deciding not to make it a big, huge, loud statement at the time, that maybe that time has passed for you. But I think you still made a very strong, loud statement, right? You did. We can say you did a little bit quieter, but you made a strong statement in the choice you made, and you've pulled all of your, thematically, all of the things that have followed you through your career and allowed you to be successful as an athlete, as an educator, as a coach, into what you're doing today.
I definitely appreciate that. I know going forward, one of the things that, and I started to feel this way before I was done teaching, was I wanted to impact on a larger scale.
Yeah.
And felt like I had been very specific. I almost always worked with really challenging populations that come from poverty and without much behind it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to influence people on a more wide scale. And also knowing that I had to make major changes personally, I also had a divine intervention a year ago, and wanting to tie all of this together and thinking about what's the best way I could get a message out on a whole bunch of fronts about what goes on in education, what goes on in a really, really bad toxic marriage, what is the fallout from that, what's the correlation between having a really toxic parent and then going, hey, hold my beer, let me go straight into that, and not always having it be great, but sharing those mistakes and those failures. And I had divine intervention in a Hollywood screenwriter about just over a year ago, last year in July. The Infinite Writer Agency out of California, their owner, Natara Osborne, was looking ahead to an impending writer's strike and was looking for projects. I was familiar by now, but I wasn't initially when I got nicknamed this, but I was nicknamed the White Shadow by my hometown newspaper in 2001 when I had taken one of the inner city teams up to my hometown of Sturgeon Bay, and we did a big article on it. It was an interesting article. It was, you could tell somebody that wrote it had not written about maybe more sensitive issues, but he called me Custer's version of the White Shadow. And so when I fought in 2022, I went as the White Shadow is my fight name. So that kind of got out into the universe a bit. And previously I had written out a whole bunch of years of my career just in case I wanted to do something with it.
Yeah.
And I had published books, so I had a writing background.
Yeah.
Natara found me through LinkedIn and asked me if I had ever thought about using my career as a potential TV script, including or separate from a reboot of The White Shadow. And it ran from 78 to 81, was super critically acclaimed, was a long TV show in an era of 30-minute shows, but they were really hamstrung. They couldn't depict urban life the way it really was. They were very, very, very limited. So for me, I started to think about this. I'm like, well, what would be interesting about this to me? It's like if it was unfiltered and it was like basically Breaking Bad in sports, like if you go and like, I want to show the brutality and just the reality of it right down to the language.
Yeah.
So we started talking and I was pretty open to it. It didn't take her long to convince me, and it couldn't have worked out any better. Perfect person for me to do this with. She was able to keep things going during the writer's strike and not break any rules or laws with that. We got this done. So we have a copyrighted script now of White Shadow Revealed. We have an entire 5-season series laid out. They're not written yet, but there is a outline for every single episode we have proposed. We have a full pilot. It's copyrighted. It is now being represented by Stage 32. So that led to Kasana Galad, who's now looking at producing it. She's repping us going forward. So as we speak, there are investors looking at our pitch decks right now. There was one for the writing portion of it, and then there was one graphic arts and the more like pretty one. And I got to do that, which was really exciting.
Cool.
Got to do the pitch deck for my own project. That's in front of investors right now. So pretty excited about it. And the two people that I ended up working with were really perfect. And when I started to look into them, it was like you don't want to believe that you've actually got some real help coming.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there struggling with a business and other things and trying to make it work. And I because I didn't do this right away, I'm like, I'm going to just Google her and realize she had written, produced, directed, and sold her own movie to Netflix, had done several other writing projects that were pretty impressive. But when she's very blunt with me, she's like, I've never done a sports story and I've never done a men's story. So this is uncharted territory for me. And I kind of thought about it and was like, I think I prefer that. I think I'd rather have a different perspective and go in and learn it and be able to come up with it. And I really feel like we nailed it on that by doing it. And so she led to setting stuff up with Kasana, and I looked her up. And when you start to see somebody has brokered deals with Glenn Close, some other really big projects, I'm like, what universe did I stumble into? And so like, I'm texting daily with, people that are in the industry, and they're pretty confident we're going to get a deal to reboot that TV series. And it's ironic because that seemed like the least likely thing to stick on the wall. Yeah. And we threw a bunch of stuff at a wall and like, what's going to stick? And it's not sticking yet, but it's not peeling off yet either. It's still there, and it looks like it's going to happen hopefully pretty quick. And we're fortunate with the people we ended up with. There's some really good connections with both of them. And we're on the front end. Stage 32 liked it enough. They didn't want it to go to studios first. They slowed the timeline down just a bit so that they could get it in front of their investors when August ended. So August is a low month for their investors, and most of them are on vacation and gone. Yeah. And so when September started, so did the marketing for that with them. So we're hoping to hear word on that pretty soon. But that would, to me, that'd be the most rewarding way to kind of go out on it. There's so much more to that story, but it's so winding, and I think when you've done a lot of this stuff and it's still fresh in your head, it wasn't all that long ago, and was doing it right up to the end. I can get this voice out there, and I think it would be beneficial for people in a world where there's not much TV that I think is capable of uniting people. On front, we're very polarized right now, but I think pitching it down the middle where I don't really cut anybody breaks, because as much as, there's some stuff that one side of the political coin might go, well, that's woke. There's also, I didn't care for Milwaukee's teacher union at all, which definitely would slant in another political direction. I don't necessarily know that I fall one way or the other on in that regard, but I'm looking at it going, I don't think you're going to be able to go and pick a side on this. I think I throw it down the middle. You're going to be mad that it ended up this way. And I think it can unite people in a sense where you're not showing something where people are always at odds. It happens, but it's not the crux of the story. The crux is overcoming adversity at all levels. And really me growing up right along with the kids that I coach and having to figure life out on several devastating things along while you're helping them. Because that to me was, I look at what I learned from them and like how I was able to kind of go back and forth and draw lessons from kids that overcame some of the most absurd things to go and have to get past. And, you know, you realize, well, I was doing some of that too. And I really internalized a lot of it. And if I can help people with a show avoid a whole lot of things from bad relationships to making people better teachers and coaches, even if they're not teaching and coaching, but you might be in that role with somebody. I think there's a lot to be learned. And I don't know that there's anything else like that on TV right now. We've been forced to watch a lot more TV than I have because we had to come up with a artist list and everything. And it kind of hit me the reality of this when we had it kicked back to us and said, you didn't find big enough names to list in. We want 4 or 5 much bigger names of people because they felt confident enough that would attract some of those. So very excited about where that's going. And it would be the ultimate way to kind of, I guess, sort of bow out of that venture and really get to still spend time in it, but in an entirely different set, you know, teaching actors how to look like wrestlers, stuff like that I could definitely contribute to. But I would love to stay on as a writer. I'm not the dialogue guy, but I definitely had written all of them out and know what order I want everything to go in. And it was so nuts. We didn't tell anybody for a while, because it sounds crazy initially. And you're like, if I, you know, and I had to finally get to a point where it was reality set in. I had to let some people know. Ben Askren, who is a U.S. Olympian, and even he fought Jake Paul in a boxing match. So even Gen Z knows who he is and is a big name, world champion fighter. And they're like, listen, if there's anybody that's famous involved in the first season, it's time to let him know.
Oh, interesting.
So I had to let him know he's a character in the first season. He'll be one for the first, all 5 seasons. But, you know, he was somebody that I was really close with during the early years and then have kept a friendship with over the years. Not as close anywhere near. He's done huge things since then, but had to go and let him know, hey, you're gonna be in this. So yeah, he was supportive, and I was happy about that. But yeah, that was reality setting in, and I remember I did that, and I'm like, oh shit, this is real. This is going to happen. So we're pretty confident. I'm trying to speak it to reality, but
yes,
the signs are all there, and I think we're looking forward to it.
That's incredible. It's so exciting. We've covered a lot of ground today. There are so many more things I still want to go back to and keep talking about. So I'll just take this chance to invite you back. We'll find a time if it works for you, and maybe align it when you have some exciting news to share. Things I want to come back to are religion, your dad, the fight at 49. Like, there's these big things we have hanging out there we haven't had a chance to cover, and so much more. But it's been such a pleasure. It's been such an incredible conversation. You've had those really strong themes throughout your life of being able to learn, to educate, to reverse engineer, to, you've brought so much insight to every stage and every aspect that we've talked about today. And I know there's so much more we haven't covered. And when we talk again, you've shared so much wisdom today. But knowing you and knowing your background as a writer, as an educator, as a father, I know that there are distinct life lessons that you will also want to share with us, and I want to get those out into the world. You're doing it in other ways, but I still want a chance for us to do it together. But for today, we'll probably wrap it there, and I want to thank you so much for everything you've shared and all of your time.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been awesome, and I'd be happy to come back.
Wonderful.
This has been a really good time today. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. So have I. Yeah, truly thank you. You've been listening to AudioLife, the podcast where we tell your story in your voice. I've been your host today, Carrie Purcell. And if you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Or check us out on YouTube at AudioLife Memoirs to see videos from today's recordings. And if this is something that you would like to try or do at home, go to audiolife.io and check out our private podcasting packages. Thanks for listening and see you next time.
If you like what you heard today, consider recording your own AudioLife private podcast or giving one to a loved one for a unique and memorable gift. Today, AudioLife listeners will receive 10% off using discount code GIFT10 and order number AudioLife Podcast. Also, remember to rate our show and subscribe so you'll never miss an episode.